Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Autism Confidential, the podcast from the National Council on Severe Autism. I am your host, Jill Escher, and we are very delighted to be back again with Dr. Manuel Casanova. You met Dr. Casanova in the previous episode where we really focused on kind of the pathologies found in autism brains. It was a very dense, complex, and technical episode, but we're going to switch gears a little bit here and kind of jump out of neuroscience and into some of the more kind of broad issues in autism and areas of controversy in autism, because Dr. Casanova, unlike I think a lot of other researchers, has been unafraid to jump in and give his opinion about things and create a platform for discussion of these matters. He has authored a blog called Cortical Chauvinism for a long time. And he's featured, his own writing, but also a lot of other people's writing, including my own. As he noted previously, he's written 18 books, and a lot of those books actually really touch on areas of controversy. And so today's episode, that's where we're going to dive in. Welcome back, Dr. Casanova.
Hi, Jill. Thank you for having me here.
We are very, very lucky to have you today. Okay, we're going to go over some hot button issues, and I want to know what you think. It's like a game show. What does Dr. Casanova think? One area that we've been involved in here at NCSA has been the topic of language in autism. There's been a movement by neurodiversity advocates to kind of purge the language, which they consider to be disrespectful. Like, you can't use words like pathology. You can't use words like psychopathology. You can't use words like, deficit or risk, or, maladaptive or problem behavior. And instead, you're supposed to use neutral terminology. Of course, we have fought back against that because we need these kind of terms to talk about the actual biology, and we have to talk about severe autism as well, and not just paint a kind of sugar-coated picture.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your view on the issue around language and autism, both as you're not a clinician, you're a researcher,
Mm-hmm.
but as somebody who has interfaced with many patients and has written prolifically
Mm-hmm.
in journals?
Well, I would say neurodiversity in general was born of good ideas that had very positive aims. It didn't differ from the aims of many other organizations, lay organizations, because everybody wants the best for their children, the patients, the individuals themselves. And I would say that in terms of neurodiversity, there are two different groups. I call them the soft and the hard. The soft neurodiversity just engages socially in terms of trying to change the verbiage so as to avoid pejorative nomenclature, and at the same time fight for accommodations by society to any limitations of the patients, whether they may be social, sensory, motor, or whatever. And that's sort of fine. The hard component is the one that actually sells a message that would need to be accepted as such. And it's dogmatic in nature, but it lacks in terms of science. And they actually oppose science, they oppose diagnostics, they oppose research, and even treatment. And I would say that that particular side of the equation of neurodiversity is extremely problematic and has caused a lot of friction and I would say that it even hurt many autistic individuals.
Well, definitely, we are of the opinion that it's absolutely imperative that we better understand the origins of autism and we create more viable therapies for autism. We still don't have, despite God knows how many gajillions of dollars poured into the field, we still don't have therapies that address the core symptoms of autism. We still don't have a means for preventing autism. And so the prospect or the specter of, though that aspect, that dimension of autism research being diminished is very frightening to me. But you do have this sort of rabid core of neurodiversity advocates who would seem perfectly content to throw all of that under the bus for the dogma, because of the dogma that autism is supposedly just a natural difference, where there's no evidence for that. It is unmoored from science.
I have engaged many people from neurodiversity, and sometimes it has been hard to debate them because they are simply blind to other people's opinion. I would say that there's a lot of noise out there because many neurodiversity proponents that claim to be autistics are really not autistics. Okay, and you have to be very careful.
I agree.
So some of the people that go into the soapbox and start claiming that all of their problems have been due by society instead of getting responsibility, their own responsibility for their problems. Some of them have really deep personality disorders, and they see the world in terms of black and white, yes or no. And whatever I say, that's what really matters, period. And you cannot debate that type of individual. I remember that I engaged one over the internet, and I was given the example of my own grandson who had seizures that couldn't be treated, period. And she told me that seizures were a blessing because it was the divine condition. Okay.
Oh my God.
I was debating another one about the mannerisms and the stereotypes and sometimes self-injurious behavior that some autistic individuals engage. And she told me that that was part of her and overall their personality. I even quoted examples of people that have died by banging the head, that had cauliflower ears, that had scratched their corneas, and apparently didn't face her that any of that would happen. So it's actually very difficult to debate under those circumstances. Many of those individuals that are truly autistics and have that way of thinking, it's nothing new. Okay, it has been around forever and ever, and it's a way of romanticizing a condition. It happened during the Renaissance when we thought that some people that suffer from madness were somehow geniuses. I mean, during the Romantic period and the Elizabethan era, we had tuberculosis. And tuberculosis was called the disease of the artists and the poets. And people actually imitated the emaciated appearance of a tuberculous patient, and they refused to go out to the sunlight because they wanted to be pale, all because of this romantic idea. And that has never sort of withered away. It has remained with us that sometimes abnormalities in terms of psyche, in terms of cognition, has an ulterior motive. And it's an idea that has permeated our way of thinking for generations. It may not be necessarily the case. Medically, it's fraught with limitations. and certainly it's an impediment to research in many cases.
Mhm. Yeah, that's exactly what we're concerned about. We're concerned about, the impediments to research, but also impediments to clinical practice and policy, the policies that facilitate, right, the availability, the access, right, to needed
I,
interventions.
I see people in associations that are layman support organizations for
Mhm,
autism.
mhm,
And all of a sudden, in order to be fair, they put autistic individuals into their boards.
mhm.
Usually, those are the more prominent autistic individuals that they can find and use them as a banner for their organization. And you examine their credentials, and you will find that in one case, the individual at most may have had PDD, NOS, autism, but when he was examined, maybe at 4 years of age, he was completely normal.
Mhm.
Okay, so he never had an official diagnosis,
Right.
but he's given information and feedback as an autistic individual within a scientific advisory board.
Right.
And
I won't mention names, but several very prominent advocates come to mind who, in my view, just simply do not meet diagnostic criteria for autism. Certainly, I think they have issues, but those issues aren't always autism. It's like, I don't know why everything has to be thrown into the bucket of autism, which I
mm,
guess would bring me to this question of diagnostics, which would be my
mhm,
next area of controversy. I mean, uh, the DSM-5, I think, has done us no favors whatsoever. It has
mhm.
made things a little easier on clinicians because now they can just click the autism box. But we're throwing, kids like my son Johnny in with, people who have very mild impairments, if really any impairment. What should we do about the diagnostic approach?
And unfortunately, there's not much that we can do. We can prevent the negatives, especially in terms of self-diagnosis, like the Seinfeld episode
Right.
in terms of autism history. Um, you know, self-diagnosis is fraught with limitations, and anybody can diagnose themselves based on social difficulties as having autism. It's an elastic diagnostic band that is breaking.
Hmm.
Okay, and we should truly avoid that. I would say that in terms of diagnosis in the future, I would propose even laboratory tests. You could say that there's not a single laboratory test that is diagnostic of autism, but there are some diagnostic tests that almost every single autistic individual have in terms of abnormality.
Like
Like we
what?
were talking before in terms
Mhm.
of gamma band abnormalities, there are different evoked components on the gamma band. And we had over 400 patients in our studies, about 15 studies that we reported, and about 400 controls that were autistics in a waiting list. So overall,
Mhm.
over 800 patients, and they all had the abnormalities in
And
comparison.
these were EEG detected.
They were EEG / evoked potentials.
Evoke potential. Okay.
Mhm.
So
So,
there,
so,
so you're saying there is a biomarker, basically.
so I am saying, and many people have proposed gamma oscillations as a biomarker of autism. Many people have done so
Mm,
because it explains so much. Okay, and it's readily available. It could be part of the diagnostic workup. It's non-invasive. Okay, and it doesn't cost a lot. Period. So that could be another possibility. But I would like to keep on going on a tangent because you brought me memories, and I would call this like the Superman syndrome. Many of the people that really assume the diagnosis of autism and went public and went on a soapbox, they did so by wearing color glasses. Okay, they would put in color glasses, and all of a sudden they were sensitive to light and they were autistic. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
they get out of their color glasses and they are no longer autistic. It's the
Right.
Superman identity.
Right.
There was a very famous autistic, so-called autistic individual, self-proclaimed.
Mm-hmm.
She had a running controversy with Fred Volkmar, and she wrote several books about autism, and she gave a lot of lectures around the world. And if you actually saw her, she wasn't really autistic at all. She had some skills, and it was sort of funny. She would write poetry, she would paint, and she believed that she was great at both and sent her submissions to different competitions. And I was one in England about autistic talent, and she sent her work, and the experts actually graded her like a fifth or sixth grader. Okay, but she was autistic, and she had a lot of sway around the world in regards to the autism community, selling symptoms that nobody else had. Okay, calling for accommodations and other individuals to stop research. She went on a congress actually in Canada and tried to stop a legislation in terms of providing money for research. Many
That's
different.
despicable. That's just despicable.
So I would say that some of the dogmatic assertions, believe me for what I am saying, believe my message, not the proofs that I could provide to upkeep them. Not only are they dogmatic, but they are morally corrupt. And I would say that of many of the assertions of neurodiversity, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
They take the voice for the majority of patients and minimizes the plight of those that are severely affected. My own first grandchild, he was diagnosed with a syndromic autism. He was the first patient diagnosed with an NLY1 mutation.
NGLY, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And he spent most of his time in a wheelchair. He never learned how to comb his hair, brush his teeth, or even put on his clothes. You see many autistic individuals, because autism is a spectrum, some may be mild, some may be severe. They can actually go to work, some of them, and then return and go to their room and play with the computer. All of a sudden, at least for a certain period of time, they can engage in activities and forget about their autism. You know, my grandson and many others can't. They wear autism as a label. They cannot disengage from their autism more so than they could stop eating, or they could cut up an arm or something of the sort.
Certainly every single person that we represent is 100% autism all the time. I mean, it suffuses every element of their lives and functioning.
And not only of their life, because if you live with one autistic child in that manner who's severely affected, autism is a part of your life every minute of every hour of every day of every week. Okay, it never goes away. It's part of the family. Okay, so there's a major difference in terms of autism being a syndrome, a spectrum of different in terms of symptoms, their severity, their onset, that varies tremendously from one patient to another. Robert Schultz used to say that every autistic patient was a snowflake. Okay, everybody was different, and you have to regard that it's completely the case. Every single individual is different. You should not make assertions for everybody. One size does not fit all.
Yeah, you would think that would be obvious, and you can't believe, right,
It's
that
very obvious.
that there's still these crusades, right, to
Mhm.
kind of narrow how we think about autism and how we talk about autism. So going back to kind of research, what do you think has been the greatest achievement in the field of autism research, and what do you think has been the greatest failure?
Well, I think that having all of these findings that actually point in the same direction of a neurodevelopmental origin could sway the mind of many individuals. The fact of recent research showing deficits that have explanatory and predictive powers that could be targeted by therapy in terms of the inhibitory cells, in terms of the basket cells, in terms of the gamma brainwave findings, are all major findings within research that should be taken advantage of. The difficulties we sort of explained before, because there are also many misleading um, uh, factors and findings within the field that sort of create noise. They don't add to the signal.
Hmm.
And yeah, and I would go on a tangent and I would say many things, but I would cut short here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, with regard to my question about the biggest failure in autism research. I mean, I think the biggest failure in autism research is a failure to figure out what's causing the increasing prevalence. You
I,
know, uh, to me, that's a huge issue, and the over dominance of the genetic,
uh,
or at least the classical, genetic narrative. You know how I feel about that, Dr. Casanova. I don't have to tell you, but
yeah,
but I it sort of boggles my mind. Um,
yeah. I would say that one of the biggest failures when we were discussing one size does not fit all
mhm,
is the undue um, significance in terms of genetics. I mean, um, autism is almost like a triple hit condition that you can attach a lot of significance to environmental factors, to genetics, and to timing during development. And it's by putting all of them together that you would be getting an autistic individual. And by variabilities within each one of them, then you could explain the spectrum. And there are many different techniques, and people go in terms of animal models and create generalizations to humans that really are not valid in any
mhm.
way, starting with their even models.
Yes, I agree with that.
And they try to create generalizations to all autistic individuals. They presume that some genetic testing in terms of DNA remodeling may provide for a cure of autism. But genetics have actually shown us that it's not one dominant gene.
Mhm,
Those are very seldom the case that appear to cause autism, but it's the
right.
mutation of many genes put together. And those 100 genes that may be affecting one individual may be different to the other 100 genes that are affecting another individual.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, there tend to be very, very ultra rare,
mhm,
mutations. I think there's a recent study that came out,
mhm.
and it found basically those kind of mutations explain 14% of autisms, and we still have 86% of cases
But on the
unexplained.
other hand, they explain like 80% of the funding out of
Yeah,
present.
right, exactly. But all the time we keep doing it, we keep putting more funding into the same
Yeah.
exact questions. Yeah.
And you said what was the biggest miss and failure of not only neuroscience research, but the government, is that they are not giving me answers. I mean, we have given them money and it has been so misused.
Yeah.
Okay. It goes to fund people that are blessed already with a lot of money in major organizations, in major universities, and they don't have to explain even the significance of the research. Okay, they can do research in terms of the nails of rats and get funded.
Right.
Okay, but at the end of the day, they are not called for responsibility on how that research will affect the life of our patients in the now rather than in generations to come. I would like to have a difference in terms of the quality of life of our patients right now.
So
And
would
I would
we.
like to see that described in terms of the research proposals.
It should be required in every proposal, you know, the actual relevance, right, to the autism population. 100%.
There is a part of a proposal that is called significance, but you can put in anything and it will be accepted.
Well, yeah, and I also think that a lot of proposals that are about autism are really just about very high functioning autism too. That's another issue. And then I think proposals really have to describe the subpopulation that they're addressing. We have a lot of autism research that's not really autism research, in my opinion. Anyway, okay, so just one more, maybe two more questions. So you have a big interest in autism issues internationally. Obviously we're NCSA is very US focused, or national council. But can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned about the major autism issues in other countries?
Well, I would say that the major issues are the same, and usually parents do not get a whole lot of support from the medical community or the government, so they have to carry on their shoulders the burden of creating change by themselves, of creating infrastructure. That happens in Spain, that happens in Costa Rica, in Peru, in anywhere. It's the parents that actually drive forth autism research and changes for their children. And the only thing that I could say, and I have visited many countries, I was the president of the International Consortium of Autism Institute and so forth. And I used to organize meetings internationally and visit schools. Is that there are many diverse findings that have been improvised by family members or by researchers, and they haven't been publicized to the general worldwide community.
Like what?
Like a school in China that had over 600 autistic individuals, a gigantic school. And they found that by changing the positioning of the back of the chairs, inclining it forwards, it would increase attention on the children and it would make them feel better because it creates more pressure on the abdomen that way. And apparently many people find it comforting. So they have an autism chair in many different places in Russia and in other places that had autism schools. they had improvised certain rules that actually made for successful education. Many patients with autism suffer from ADHD, and it's very difficult for them to pay attention and not to give to their impulses. They used to bring those individuals half an hour before school time and provide exercises to them that would actually benefit them for the rest of the day. Those were like social sharing exercises. In one particular school, which was a rehabilitation center also, which is still another different subject, because this particular school was part of a hospital. Okay, they didn't see the difference. They thought that education was part of therapy. But and again, this was in China. I don't remember where, but they had the sensitization massages, and they had like 5 or 6 different types of massages.
Oh, that should be in every autism school.
It's very important.
Yeah.
I mean, it increases socialization, it calms the patients down, and they have actually produced for some new types of massages, including electric therapy that I actually tried on me. And they were highly successful. You know, some of the schools that I am talking about, when I was asking questions about their success rates in terms of employing autistic individuals after school, they were telling me that 75, 80% of them would find some type of work that would allow for them to sustain themselves. Okay. That changes dramatically in the United States, where the statistics are for autistic individuals is maybe from, say, 6 to 15%. It's extremely low. It's extremely low. Okay. So I learned a lot, and what we were trying to do was to exchange ideas internationally and see if we could appropriate many of the better ones for the sake of our autistic individuals. There's a lot to learn from each other, and those can actually make significant changes in terms of the quality of life of patients.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Basically, a lot of these innovations from around the world are underreported, perhaps, you know, and there should be more kind of cross-pollination, right?
And I will tell you that you do not need to improvise anything out of the box. You can use whatever is culturally available. You know, in China, they did a lot of watercolor in terms of classes. In other, but watercolor is an incredible thing in China. Everybody seems to be doing watercolors. So they didn't go outside of the box. They improvised whatever they had in Colombia. Okay, it was music, and they are big into salsa, and their kids actually went into international competitions. And it was great because it allowed them to socialize. You can work with whatever you have in hand and make it work, okay, for the kids.
Interesting. Well, thank you. I'm actually going to ask one more question, then we're going to close out this episode. There's a totally different topic. There are companies now that are investigating gene therapies for autism. And I look at it and I'm like, you know, like kind of a CRISPR kind of model where you actually can go in and you can change gene expression, right, in the neurons. I guess that's the idea. But what we talked about in the last episode was about how the origins of autism lay in the abnormalities of brain development and in the actual structure right? The microstructure
Mhm.
of the brain, particularly the cerebral cortex. How could gene therapies be successful, right, in treating somebody with autism? It seems to me you can't undo, what is hardwired in the brain. It's not like, oh, we're just increasing the level of a neurotransmitter or something like that. It's not like that. It's structural. So, have you given this area any thought?
No, you answered your own question, and it's in the sense that we have already spoken about the fact that autism is not a single gene condition. There are many, and
Hmm.
whichever are affected in one individual are different from the next individual.
And you can't create like a new gene therapy for each individual without,
No,
$10 million per
and,
person or
and,
$100
and
million
whenever
per
you
person.
are dealing even with
Yeah.
these new
Yeah.
technologies, you're talking about changing like one gene. It's not about changing 100 different genes that are in different chromosomes and so forth. So
Mhm.
it's an illusory. I think that they are using like a magic wand, trying to create like an illusion that this could
Yeah.
actually
Well, people
happen.
are investing in these companies. I mean, I'm hyper skeptical about it. I wonder if there might be some real
And then they
subset.
don't invest in real ones. I will tell you that instead of doing the genetics for a therapeutic intervention,
Mhm.
there are many different modalities in terms of neuromodulation that could offer significant benefits to autistic individuals, and they are not being funded or
Mhm.
researched more.
Well, guess what? Our next episode's going to be on that
Oh
exact
my
topic.
goodness.
So we're going to
Okay.
cut this off, everybody. And Dr. Casanova is going to stay on. Everybody, thank you for joining us today for our second in our series of 3 episodes with Dr. Manuel Casanova. And if you didn't hear the episode before this one, please go back, because I gave a long introduction describing how eminent he is in the field and his wide variety of endeavors and achievements. So we will be back. Okay, everybody, signing off. Thanks for tuning in to Autism Confidential. If you'd like to learn more, share an idea for an episode, or become a sponsor, please visit us at autismconfidential.org. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual speakers. Content presented is for informational purposes only, and we do not provide any medical or legal advice.